Welcome to Scanners Offline, a Dropfleet podcast by Matt,
Will, and JJ.
Hello, Dropfleeters, and welcome to episode 4 of Scanners Offline. We have been away for a little while. I think our last episode was, back in December, wasn't it? We just squeezed it in.
Yeah.
Late December, just before everyone sort of broke up for Christmas. We are only at 2/3 of our drop fleeting power at the moment.
So our friend Will is also a farmer by trade, and tis the season to create new lambs, apparently. So he is unable to involve himself in space combat.
I like how you Christmased that. 'Tis the season for lambs.
Well, it kind of is. Like,
he's hands deep in a sheep.
Oh, God, you had to go there.
So we will be lacking Will, I think, for a little while. So I'm sure he'll be back at some point. We may be inviting some guests on if we get the time with them. So look out for some guest members of Scanners Offline in the future. Right. So this episode we will be doing a little bit of news. We've got things about TT and their announcements. We are going to talk about war stories. We've got our Escalation League carrying on at Red Warsock. Some of our best games from that. In White Sphere Wisdom, we've had some questions from listeners about tournament scenarios and about bombardment. And yes, then we'll talk about any events that are upcoming as well. The news, the bit where we talk about new goings-on in the Dropfleet world. So we've had lots of news and announcements actually from TT relatively recently. I think it's going back about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, that they put out their message that the TT web store and all the Dropfleet and all the Drop Zone, it's all ready to go, it's ready to sell. So they got themselves organised and got together. And that's great news because it means the product's flowing again.
It is. It really is. It's probably taken, I'd say, a little bit longer than the community would have liked to get the stuff flowing again. But that said, I think that now it's up there. Hopefully they'll get good service. They'll be getting things out nice and quick. It looks like the stock levels are pretty good. Things that have been out of stock for a while, like the Advanced Sectors pack, are back into stock, which is great. I think it's good news, and things are moving again.
Alongside all the regular stock being available, it was somewhat of a nice surprise actually to see that they've recast and have spare some of the exclusives from the Kickstarter. As someone who bought into the Kickstarter, I mean, it was always nice being able to have that actual Basilisk model all the way from the beginning, but I think it caused a lot of happiness in the community actually, looking across Facebook, that those exclusives, if you want an Avalon or an Atlantis rather than Perth or Johannesburg, you can now get one, as long as it's within certain time brackets that TT specify. So the exclusives are only available during shows, aren't they?
Yeah, so they're running a launch sale for the web store where they're pretty much putting all the exclusives on there that they have. That's it's while stocks last. So as soon as they're gone, they're gone. That said, I'm sure they'll be keeping some back for the shows, and they'll be following in Hawk's tradition to sell those at shows as exclusives there as well as launching new ones, I should imagine.
It's a really good idea because as gamers we are collectors, aren't we? We like to have one of everything. And I do for the factions that I do, I like to be able to have one of each thing.
You only have one?
I have 2 or 3 of certain things. Hydras. It's nice for gamers to be able to do that, to get the ones that they thought were gone forever, those exclusives. They're now available again. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, especially the 2-ups, the 2-up Beijing. People being able to get those again is great because they've been going for pretty ridiculous prices online on eBay and stuff like that. So I think it's great for those to be available again. Not sure how long that's going to last. I could foresee the 2-ups only being a launch sale thing and not available again for the foreseeable, unless they decide to do another exclusive relaunch at some point. I have had to fight very hard not to buy a 2-up Beijing. So I've been avoiding their website a bit.
How much are they selling it for?
I think it's £50.
Okay, so it's quite a lot, isn't it? It's a model that you can't use.
For a model that's going to sit on the shelf and look awesome, but never get used.
I like the idea that when we went down to Bromley and went to Warboar's Dropfleet tournament, they used the 2-up as a trophy. I think that's a nice idea. The only trouble being that you can't give it away, I suppose. Otherwise, you're giving away like £50 worth of trophy every time. But,
I think it would be quite good to have something like that as a trophy. If you gave it like a nice scenic base and you could, write the winner's name on it and have it transferred from winner to winner.
Yeah, if you could trust people to bring it back to the next tournament, like if we had a Maelstrom one.
Yeah, but if people are travelling a long way,
like damage.
Chance of them bringing that back is slim, I think. So
we need to have one like encased in like bronze or gold or something, and then attached to a proper trophy base
with a GPS tracker.
Big massive thing. If found, please redeliver to Red Warsock. Now, one of the biggest bits of news and one of the most interesting is the release of a new ship. New ships for PHR and UCM. So that's new, that it can be used for 2 factions. And this is the Centurion. Now, if you're following Dropfleet generally, I don't think this will be new to you because it has been all over the Facebook pages. Anyone who plays Dropfleet, I'm sure, has already heard about the Centurion. But it is a new remnant ship that's been specified. That makes me think of new factions, but we'll talk about that in a second. There have been discussions about power creep here because new ship seems quite strong. Just to run through some of the finer points of its statistics, it is the first ship to have 2+ armor. We've heard that some monitors may be having 2+ armor. Now, in a game where it's criticals are quite important, 2-up armor is basically going to shrug off anything that isn't a critical. That makes it pretty durable. It's a cruiser class. It's not even a heavy cruiser.
A medium.
Yeah, it's a medium. I mean, that's a disadvantage for tonnage, but it's an advantage for slot position in where you put it in the list, because it doesn't have to be in a Vanguard group. It can be in any way you take a cruiser, medium cruiser slot. Scan sig average. It's slow thrust, but no slower than other things like 7 inches. So it's
same as a
reasonable.
Moscow,
yeah.
UCM heavy cruiser.
12 hull, which makes it the highest hull cruiser except PHR troop ships, I believe, that have 13 and are still cruisers. It's got bad point defense, but then if you're comparing point defense 3 to say UCM's point defense 5, and you need 5-ups to make it work, is that really going to make a difference?
It's not a lot less, really.
Especially as if you're a UCM player, you can take Jakartas and just
which I would
negate that weakness entirely with 2 Jakartas. Then they're group 1 to 2, but rare, which means you can actually take 4 in a list at 1250.
Or 6 at a higher level.
Yeah, but no one's really reached playing like battle level, have they? Not apart from casual games. So for 1250 clash and tournaments, you could take 4. Lots of people looking at taking 2 because its weapon systems are an attack 2, damage 3, bloom, 3-up gun with a 270-degree arc.
Big ass cannon, basically.
Yeah, so it spikes itself, but if on one of those 2 dice you roll a 5, you've immediately done 3 criticals. That's really powerful. Lots of people thinking that might drop down to damage 2, because these are experimental rules, we should point out. And as well as that, it's got some classic kind of PHR medium broadsides as well that are linked. Not as many as an Orion. It's got Orion has 8 4-ups. The Centurion only has 6 on each side. But when you couple that with the main gun, that's a lot of firepower when it goes weapons free.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think stats wise, it's a pretty good ship, a pretty solid all round ship. It's going to be able to get into the heart of the battle, slug it out. It can take the hits because it's got the higher hull points. Overall, I'm kind of happy with most of its rules. My concerns with it is that I don't think it should be group 1 to 2. I think it should be 1. I think having them in pairs is overkill, and it's way too cheap, in my opinion. I actually think its profile is pretty good. I think it kind of fits the fluff, and it sounds pretty good. It's a nice looking model. I just think it needs to be a bit more expensive, and you not to be able to have as many by having a smaller group size. other than that, I think it's pretty good because it'll fit nicely into a PHR or a UCM force. In PHR, you can use the Calypsos to protect it, and in the UCM fleet, you can use the Jakartas to protect it, which interestingly actually makes Jakartas a bit more useful now.
Well, I was thinking this. Looking at this ship, I think it is designed to get players to take all the ships that they currently don't take within their own faction. So it's to get UCM players to take Jakartas. If you're going to take that, you immediately think Jakarta, cover the point defense weakness. If you're a Shaltari player playing against them, the main weakness of that Centurion is particle lancers, because particle lancers always crit. So straight away, you're negating the 2-up armor. So that is an incentive for Shaltari players to take, admittedly, Jades are still rubbish, but to take particle lancers generally, take a granite or obsidian. They're gonna really enjoy playing against that, because if it fires its main gun, it's got a big spike on it. Shaltari have massive range anyway, so I think there's a clear weakness there to particle weapons. PHR and Shaltari's both battleships will be quite good against it, because it's not going to stop the diamond doing crippling effects on it, is it? Diamonds are still picking out from miles away.
Yeah, I mean, what's its signature? 6, same as a normal UCM ship. So yeah, I mean, a diamond is still gonna batter it. Also, like the ruby, because it's got a pair of particle lancers on it as well. For me, particle lancers work better as a combination weapon. So usually taking a ship that's got them with other stuff, not relying on them. Like, I wouldn't really want to take a ship that's just particle lancers. I wouldn't think, oh, I'm going to take one with just particle lancers just in case they've got a Centurion. I'd rather have a couple scattered around in the list, so that I've got some options if one does appear, rather than take a dedicated ship just to hunt Centurions and then not face any.
I mean, Scourge's close action should be fairly strong against it with its point defense, so you've got to get a lot of criticals. Though when I'm attacking with a group of 4 Jinn, I generally get 8, 9, 10 critical hits out of it.
Yeah, I mean, even with a couple of Jakartas, that's going to struggle to fight off Scourge.
The sheer mass of dice will still get through.
I think that fits the fluff though, because these ships would have got battered when the Scourge attacked the UCM in the fluff. So
if I was going to say anything, if for my 2 cents, I would say the points can stay, the tonnage can stay. If it stays rare in group 1 to 2, then the things I would change would just be to accentuate the weaknesses. So I would make it like thrust 5 or 6 inches. I'd make it really slow, because then it's got to max thrust, and then if it goes weapons free next turn, then it's constantly going to be having lots of spikes on it, but it's got armor as a defense. So I would say thrust 6 I'd like to see, and perhaps make the point defense really deliberately like point defense 1. If it's going to be a weakness, like make it a real weakness, and then leave everything else as it is. If the stats don't change, the points, it probably needs to go tonnage heavy, group 1, and 135 points. A little bit of a bump. But we'll see what the community does with it, because I pointed this out on Facebook. There's no point calling foul on it yet, because people are proxying it, but the model's not out yet, so we've barely had time to play with it as a community. We'll see where it goes. Yeah, overall, I think a new ship is good for shaking up metas, and like I said, I think it's designed to bring out the less used ships in all the other factions, which is quite clever. We'll see. Worth pointing out as well, this is a very long news section, but we've had quite a few things to talk about. It's mentioned in the fluff around the Centurion that it's a remnant ship, and 2 clear factions are mentioned. The Vega Scrap Fleet, being the remnants of the Battle of Vega, and these ships being among them, have now reappeared and are kind of warily helping the UCM. And then there's another faction, which is the Kalium Cabal, a UCM planet that really early on in the rebuilding shut itself off, turned its fold space nodes off, and has been independent ever since. And it has some of these ships too. Now, what does this remind us of, JJ?
Well, the resistance from Drop Zone and how they've got the feral faction and kind of your like the kind of UCM loyal faction. What's the other side of resistance?
So resistance, your resistance allied,
so
and resistance feral.
Yeah, so I mean these 2 factions in Dropfleet very much seem to mirror the kind of character and personality of the two sort of factions within the resistance within Drop Zone. Now, there's obviously been talk about having a resistance fleet in Dropfleet that quite a lot of communities kind of dismiss as that's not really going to work. You can't have resistance in space. I think they have been quite clever in the way that they've done this. I quite like the fluff. I've read quite a lot of discussions online. It's very I think controversial maybe isn't the right word, but there's certainly a split opinion about whether it's good or bad. But yeah, I think the ship's good. The fluff that goes with the ship and the background story that they've given with it, for me, it makes sense.
So we'll see if this is the beginnings of a remnant/resistance fleet.
I certainly wouldn't be surprised.
I can see that being 5th faction. I'm going to call it now and say that's 5th faction.
The 5th race.
It's not bad. It's not the 5th race. 5th faction.
I know. Doesn't sound right.
Right. Let's move on to War Stories. War Stories. The bit where we talk about battles that we've had. Okay, well at Red Warstock at the moment, we've been gaming quite a lot of Dropfleet, once every 2 weeks, or some of us once a week even. We've been keeping up the pace quite a lot. Some people getting into practicing for Battle of Tlalacon, which will be at Beachhead. That's coming up. So people are starting to practice for that. But the Escalation League has reached up to 1,000 points now. 1100's coming up. JJ, want to pick out highlights from some of your games recently?
Yeah, I mean, my last game was against Adam. It was a good little battle between Shaltari and UCM. He's got a very good list, and I'm still very new to Shaltari, so it's quite challenging for me to kind of work out what I'm supposed to be doing, what I'm supposed to be going, and making sure that my void gates stay in the 18-inch chain, which from time to time I let slip, and I'm like, no.
This is Shaltari basics. Come on.
I know.
You've got to get the chain sorted at the very least.
So far, my games have had quite a consistent theme of doing quite well in space, but kind of losing the ground war. So I'd like to thank you, Matt, for making critical locations 3 points rather than 2. That's probably give me a bit more room to move.
In the old rules, you would have been losing.
I would have been losing quite badly.
Yeah.
So using 3 points critical locations allowed me to score a bit better in space. Due to the range and some of the guns I've got, I tend to kill most of the ships I shoot at from a distance. But I'm losing the ground war. Basically, I just don't have enough void gates.
Void gate pack.
Yeah, TT. If there's one thing on my Christmas wish list for last year, it's a void gate pack. Please release void gates in multiples. I really don't want to have to buy 2 boxes of 2 cruisers to get 4 void gates, because that's essentially what I'd have to do.
It's like paying £40 for 60 points of ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, this can't go on. We need more. I've recommended that you proxy some. No, not proxy some. That you kit bash some out of Shaltari parts.
I've actually started looking online for some alternate sculpts that could be used. Alternate spaceship sculpts, looking for gates and circular ships and things like that, to try and find something that I could use instead. Yeah. Where I could just buy a pack of 20 of them or something and just use all of them for void gates. No luck yet, but let me know if anybody's found anything to use as an alternate to a void gate, because that'd be great to get a tip.
Yeah, please get in touch. Say anything about void gate proxies.
Just to finish up my last game with Adam, I managed to just about scrape a draw on kill points. That occurred because a military sector's 2-shot, 3+ hit defense battery managed to finish off a San Francisco, which took me over the kill point threshold and took me from a 15-13 loss to a 15 all draw. So wasn't really the strength of the Shaltari faction, it was just a lucky defense battery, but I'll take it.
I'm just going to chip in quickly. I've been taking part in this Escalation League as an extra because I'm running it, so I'm not recording my own points, but I am playing in it. I notable recently because I had my heaviest loss ever in any Dropfleet game that I played. I've never been 20-0'd, but I lost 19-1.
Well, at least you let you keep your dignity.
Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't 20-0. Yeah, 19-1 sounds ever so slightly better.
Was that George?
Yes, it was George. Yeah, this is really good to see. Actually, he's one of our newer players coming through the ranks. Just in the last few months, he's joined the Escalation League, and we're sort of growing the community in Red Warstock. We're up to about 14 players now, and He's our new generation, going with UCM, and I'm using my PHR broadsides list, which I'm trying to stick with, even though it's obviously evident that it's nowhere near as effective as doing bombers or burn throughs. So I run like an Achilles and 2 Orions at 1,000 points, and troop ships, Medeas, Echoes, the usual. But George he's very quickly picked up on good UCM tactics. Faced me with 2 New Cairos, 2 Berlins, and the Perth. So that's 5 burn throughs to try and dip, duck, dodge, and dive away from, and didn't do nearly well enough. He even managed to. Well, I'm just gonna pick out one highlight. Basically, the burn throughs just blew me away. But the highlight was I thought, okay, I've got my Calypso ready to save my Achilles. The first burn through attack on it will only then be critically on 6s, because it will push it to 4s. And he'll either decide not to shoot at it because of that, or he'll shoot at it and do nothing. So he was like, yeah, okay, I'll go for it. Berlin coming in, I'll burn through the Achilles. Yes, okay, I'll use the Calypso, +1 to your lock value. First 2 dice, 4 and a 6. Critical start. Next dice, 2 4s. Next dice, 2 4s. So even needing 4s to hit.
So 1 hit, 5 crits.
5 crits and a hit. It had already been slightly damaged, my Achilles, so it went to crippling. I got reactor overload, and then it got engines disabled, and it went in one go from a burn through, hitting it on 4s. So it was one of those games, but I can't blame that. It was George's tactics. He's really picked up on the UCM. So I'm tipping him Prodigy, Dropfleet Prodigy for the future.
Yeah, I mean, just to chip in there, I actually played George the week after you in a practice game. He brought a very similar list with 5 burn throughs, and it was very scary and very brutal. He was using New Orleans strike carriers to active scan and light up my Shaltari ships before then hitting them with a burn through, which took away my range advantage quite nicely. And meant I pretty much had to get my shields up pronto on all of my ships. Suffice to say, things went quite pear-shaped, but he's a very good player, and he's definitely got the hang of burn through lasers for sure.
Yeah, I can stop going easy on him now. He gets the full Scourge list next time, the tournament winning list. Right, yeah, so look out for George in the future. We're going to bring him along to some tournaments. Dark horse favourite.
Yeah.
White Sphere Wisdom, the bit where we talk about issues relevant to the Dropfleet community, Tactica, and any questions from you. Okay, we've had a few questions from listeners, which is always good. You can post them on our Twitter feed, or you can post them on our Facebook group. You can message myself, Matt Purdy, or Jason James, JJ directly, that's fine. We always like people getting involved. It tells us that we're not just speaking to nobody. People are listening. Yay!
We have friends!
Right, so we've got Eternal Wargamer on Twitter sent us a question about scenarios that TOs choose, that tournament organisers choose. Now, we're up to the point in the UK now where we've probably had maybe 6 or 7 tournaments across the country, including Invasion, since the inception of Dropfleet. And that's enough data now to notice some patterns emerging. So we were asked, why are certain scenarios coming up a lot? Why aren't others being used at all by TOs? Why were those tournament scenarios picked in the first place out of the rulebook? Because it's only 5 out of 8 scenarios that were suggested.
Yeah.
So if we first just talk about the ones that are missing, and I don't know about you, JJ, but I feel like we've begun to forget that these scenarios even exist that aren't used.
Yeah, I mean, out of the 3 that aren't in the tournament pack, I can't remember the last time I played them, to be honest. Erupting Battlefront has the line down the middle.
Never played that.
I'm sure I have played it, but it can only have been once. Power Grab and Defense Relay, I'm pretty sure, again, out of those 3, I think I played each one once, maybe.
There's a good reason why Defense Relay isn't used. And that's because I've thought 2 reasons why it's not used at all. It's got 4 clusters straight down the middle, a 2er, a 4er, a 4er, a 2er, and it's got 2 stations as well for larger games that are also really close to the middle. So that's a lot of points in the centre, I think whenever this scenario gets played, you end up with loads of ships crowding the middle in a big cluster maul. As well as that, the two outside tours have the scanner, which gives an extra 3 inches, and which I don't know about everyone listening, but our community decided very early on that we should never ever use the scanner, because already it's already hard to avoid being within Shaltari range. If they've taken the scanner as well, they get plus 3 inches. If they take the other one, they've got plus 3 inches. That's a scan of 18 inches, naturally. So we never use that scenario or that token ever, because it doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a shame, really. I mean, that sector type has such a disproportionate effect.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. Yeah, it's a separate topic really about that. But yeah, having those two in that scenario makes it very biased towards the longer range fleets, or the faster fleets maybe.
Yeah.
So I mean, the scanners help the Shaltari because it makes their range even longer, and helps the PHR, but not quite as much. But the scenario itself is, board edge deployment, and there's 24 inches to get to a scoring point, which is obviously going to benefit the faster factions like Shaltari and Scourge. So I think that scenario is quite unbalanced towards the either faster or longer ranged forces. I think UCM and even PHR, even though they have got a slightly longer range, are going to struggle because they're slower.
Shaltari and Scourge will both do well at that scenario, and it's the same thing for power grab. It's a diagonal one, so there's clusters from bottom left corner to top right, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3. I mean, that is a lot of points on the ground anyway.
Well, in the original rules, before they changed the rules for sectors, those 2 power plants are worth even more points. They're worth like 4 points or something.
Only in terms of controlling the cluster.
Yeah.
Because it's the value of the sectors, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's diagonal deployment, which means that again UCM and PHR are at a disadvantage because they're slower. Everything worth scoring is in the middle. So it's a race to the middle, which Shaltari and Scourge are going to win, and their strike carriers are going to be able to get there without max thrusting. Void Gates can get there without max thrusting. The Medeas and the New Orleans can't do that. So that's not really a fair scenario either. Just looking at the ones that are picked out for tournaments, in the tournament pack there is Mixed Engagement, Taken Hold, Grid Control, Moonshot, and Station Assault. Now, we've noticed a pattern of Urge. The most popular ones that will appear in a tournament, and I followed this pattern when we did Maelstrom, the ones that you will see are Grid Control, Mixed Engagement, and Moonshot most frequently. It is nearly always those 3. Reasons being, Grid Control, though it is all ground-based, has 2 home clusters, and they are worth double for critical locations in clusters, which means even though that is a heavy ground scenario, it makes the scoring much closer and more even, because usually both players will hold on to their own home double scoring clusters. And then you're just fighting over the 2, the 4, and the 2, which makes the scenario closer. Yeah. In Mixed Engagement, there's 3 stations. It's distant deployment, which sort of negates Shaltari battleships, makes the diamond harder to be influential, so that helps curb Shaltari's power a bit. The stations curbs the effect of strike carriers, and the points are about it. They're fairly close between CL and clusters, because the space stations are only critical locations. So if you want to take them to fire the guns on them, fine. If you want to have ships near them, fine, but they're not worth anything on the ground. So that makes Mixed Engagement a really balanced scenario. And then Moonshot is balanced. It's fairly balanced. It's still a race around the moon in that I think UCM and PHR are slightly disadvantaged on this one. It's got stations in it, which helps negate strike carriers, again. But it's got home clusters that both players can take and hold, making the point scoring equal.
Well, it's home space stations.
Home stations, yeah, as clusters. And then you compete over the 4s. It does make a bit of a traffic jam over the 2-4 clusters, but of the 3 that I'm just mentioning, the Moonshot's probably the least balanced. But it is really hard to smash somebody on that one, because you've got to get to their back home space station going around the moon. And that's tricky to do. You've got to break through their attacking line and get into the backfield. So that's hard. So that one's... It's also... We've got to think about practicality for TOs as well.
Need a moon.
You need a moon, yep. That's not too hard to cut out a big old circle. But Station Assault, I really like as a scenario. However, there's a big reason why it doesn't appear in tournaments much.
You need 5 stations per game.
5 stations per table, yeah.
So if you got 10 boards, that's 50 space stations you need.
And you could, if you wanted to, say, okay, well, I don't have that many stations, fine, but I'm a budding tournament organizer. I still want to do it. I'll cut out the ones that are provided on the Hawk website. Oh, that takes ages. It takes ages to cut out so many. They look a bit rubbish because it's just cut out card and printed. And if you're going to do stations, you want real stations. I would love to do Station Assault. I want to at Maelstrom 2. If we club together all together, probably we can maybe do it if all the players chip in all their stations. And I know that Tlalacon, that Adam is going ahead and doing that. Adam and George, they put Station Assault down. So I don't know whether they're using real stations or using cutouts. But either way, I think that's good for the game.
I would expect to see cutouts. Okay. I think. But yeah, I could be pleasantly surprised.
And then the reason that I hear you cry, why isn't Taken Hold used? That's on the tournament list. Taken Hold is heavily favoured to the ground. So it's a real... If you bring loads of strike carriers, you will probably win this scenario. Because it's loads and loads of points on the ground compared to critical locations. And there isn't an easy home one to take either. So it's easier for the faster factions to steal the 3 cluster, which is slightly off the midline. So that one it's not a fair scenario. It doesn't help counter strike carrier spam, which is the reason you rarely see Taken Hold used.
I think as far as scenarios goes, it's kind of dull as well. There's no space stations in there. There's no particularly interesting sectors in there. It's just literally run to the middle and land as many ground troops as you can. Because as Matt says, it's very ground combat heavy. It ends up being a massive battle of counters on the floor, rather than flying around shooting spaceships, which is for me the fun part.
Yeah, even the variant it makes the disparity between clusters and critical locations even bigger because it doubles the points for cluster and CL for the 3ers, so that makes it even more heavily disproportionate to ground. Yeah. So we also had, that's really about the scenarios. Is anyone designing bespoke scenarios yet? This from Eternal Wargamer and Adam Cox. Yes, some people are starting to design bespoke scenarios.
Do you know anybody?
Oh, it's me. I'm designing bespoke scenarios. I've been designing scenarios for Red Warsock to use since Dropfleet started, really. In our Escalation League and our own tournament. I've been doing it. I've not done it for Maelstrom. Use the standard ones for that. Designing scenarios is tricky. It's harder than it looks. Quite often, because looking at it on paper, you don't know how it's going to play until people actually test it. Yeah, some of them work well.
Kind of need to play test the scenarios really. Like if you're going to use them in a competitive format, Maelstrom 2 for example, we'd need to do a lot of play testing to make sure we were happy they were balanced before taking them into a competitive
environment. So I am looking at. I think I'm ready now for Maelstrom 2 to have, if not bespoke scenarios, I am seriously considering adjusting the current tournament scenarios and just trying to fix them in places. I'll probably remove Taken Hold. If I was to make my own tournament pack with 5 scenarios, I'd probably change Taken Hold heavily and make adjustments to the others, and a major change being changing critical locations to worth 3 points, which we found has worked really well actually in our games and Escalation League, so that is a change we're going to implement.
Yeah, pretty much all the games of Dropfleet now at Red Warsock use 3 points for critical locations. I've not heard anyone have any problem with doing that, and I think we find it makes it a much more balanced fight between the ground and space, and edges the enjoyment back towards the space combat a little bit, just enough to make it a fair fight. So if someone brings a ground heavy list, it's fine, they can win on the ground. If someone brings a space heavy list, they can still win in space, and it's an even fight.
Advice for any budding TOs who are going to start writing their own scenarios: I would take the time to add up how many points are scored for the ground and for the air for critical locations at turns 4 and 6, added it up. And I don't think any scenario should have more points for critical locations, because at the end of the day, it is still a drop into the ground game. But I think they should range from between being equal to the ground points being no more than like a 30% extra. So if there were 15 points available for critical locations, like 5 clusters worth 3 each, then I would go as far as having 20 available on the ground, but no more than that. There shouldn't be any more disproportion than that. So between 15 and 20 available for the ground. So a little bit more, but not way more, which some of the scenarios are way more heavily favoured to ground. So look out for adjusted scenarios in Maelstrom 2, which we are beginning to plan. So it's coming up. If you think the tournament scene is looking a little bit bare right now, keep your eyes peeled and your ears peeled. We will be doing Maelstrom 2 very soon. Moving on to our final question. Charlie Hamilton, the champion of Maelstrom 1 and the winner of Fleet Muster 2 in Cardiff as well.
But he can't make it to Battle of Tlalacon.
He's not there.
Somebody else can win.
Oh.
Thanks, Charlie.
He has asked, why is it rare to see bombardment ships in lists? So, pretty straightforward question. What do you think, JJ?
Yeah, so, I mean, I quite enjoy bombardment. I think it's a fun thing to do. You know, being able to just level ground cities and stuff is good fun. Especially if you to do a linked drop zone Dropfleet game. I think in Dropfleet, bombardment has not as big a role as it should. I think it's a side tactic. It's kind of a secondary tactic that you can use. If you go into a game and you see that the opponent is probably going to win on the ground, you think, okay, so I'm just going to bomb him. That's great. It's good to have that in your arsenal. But ultimately the game is about capturing the ground. You're invading. It's an invasion. That's the point. Blowing the ground up is kind of counterintuitive. You can end up losing potential victory points if you bomb the wrong place. Like blowing up a sector and then realising actually he's not got enough ground troops to hold it anyway. You could have taken it, then you just cost yourself some VPs. I think that's one of the things holding it back from being used. Also, some of the ships, for example, we talked about in the previous episode about the Tokyo. Great bombardment weapons, too slow. Can never get anywhere to use them. That's only one example. Some of the other factions have much better bombardment.
We can quickly go through. So, I mean, the Tokyo, not so much. The Madrid?
Excellent ship. I've had great experiences with the Madrid. I often take a pair of them. They're, if anything, a little bit too cheap. I think,
cheapest cruiser body in the game, aren't they?
Yes. Medium tonnage. It's, for me, it's kind of weird, but the best thing about the ship is it's got full-size close action. D6 plus 1 shots, so I can fire 4 shots on weapons free, D6 plus 1 close action shots, and 6 shots hitting on 2s on the ground each, which is a lot of firepower over a 4 cluster or something. So I think they're great ships, the Madrids. I think we should see more of them.
So Shaltari have the jet, and they have as the heavy one, and they have the turquoise as the medium. The turquoise. Shaltari actually have pretty good bombardment, and it's got good range as well, because even though it's a close... no, it's not close action, is it? It's just bombardment. Their bombardment's pretty good. I think it's valid for Shaltari players to pop a little bit in, because it also has that alternate close action use.
Yeah, I mean, their bombardment ships are fast. They've got a long scan range, and they've got alternate fire mode. That close action, that beam close action, is really good. Luke at the club's been using a jet as his flagship up to now in the Escalation League, and it's a good ship. It's scary.
In PHR, obviously Medeas have a small amount of bombardment, hitting on 4s. That's very situational. You may not, even when you have the opportunity to fire, you may not do enough damage.
They're kind of like a surgical strike bombardment weapon that kind of just fires and blows up one building rather than a level the place.
If your opponent's got 1 tank in an industrial sector, say, and you haven't pinned it with troops already, then have a go. You might kill that tank. If you can get the damage away, then it's unlikely that armor's going to make it save on a 5+. But that's situational. The Ganymede, as a troop ship, I really like. I think if you're going to take bombardment for PHR, too many people I think just go, the Orpheus, yeah, loads of 5+ shots, light caliber guns. I like the Ganymede because you can quite happily set it aside in scenarios where you've got battle groups coming in later. Stick the Ganymede in there because you'll know where your opponent is and it can chug up the board and bombard and take stuff. You just have to be careful not to accidentally kill a sector.
I've had the same thing with the Madrids and the UCM, to be fair.
Yeah.
You need to be careful because if you fire all of that at one, you could level a cluster.
And Scourge. Scourge have slight problems in that their only bombardment at the moment is on a frigate chassis. So the Charybdis.
Yeah, they suffer. I think you guys need something bigger with bombardment.
The logic being, I suppose, that Scourge are holding the ground, so they're not going to have much bombardment prepared.
Yeah, they're in a defensive posture rather than they don't really need bombardment.
Yeah, so that's... I mean, they are effective in groups, and they can hide in atmosphere, pop up and bombard in low orbit, go down again to hide. But if anything pays attention to them, they tend to die very quickly.
You need quite a few of them as
but their bombardment is good. Like, I've taken 4 of them. That's 16 3-up shots at bombardment. Like, that will kill a sector, definitely. But then you've invested like 150 points in bombardment that's only on frigates, which are easily killed. So you have to really commit to it if you want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, faction-wise, I think UCM has solid bombardment for obvious reasons. You know, their fluff is that they're coming to reclaim the colonies. They're intentionally going to bring a load of bombardment ships with them because they know they're going to bomb Scourge out of the places they're attacking. I think Shaltari have got pretty good bombardment. I'd say they're kind of tier 1, Shaltari and UCM for bombardment. Then kind of below that, you've got on tier UCM, 2, you've got
PHR.
You've got PHR. Yeah. Who've got kind of... They would have better bombardment, but all of their ships are so multi-role, and like they're designed to be alright at everything. They're not quite as dedicated.
Specialist, yeah.
You know, like a Madrid is a dedicated bombardment ship. Taken in pairs, it obviously becomes a lot better at other stuff. But you know, as an individual ship, it's a bombardment ship.
Yep.
I think and Tokyo the same. It's a bombardment ship. With the Shaltari ships, their ships are a bit better multi-role because they've got the alternate fire mode. But you know, the PHR, they've got kind of piecemeal bombardment. They've got their strike carrier is a strike carrier and a bombardment ship, which is great synergy, but it's not great at either. It's kind of alright at both. And you know, troop ships ultimately are troop ships, not bombardment ships.
That's their purpose.
So they've got a secondary function. That's why their bombardment isn't quite as good. I think Scourge are kind of the one that's lagging behind with bombardment. But
they've got strengths in other places as well.
Yeah, their strength is close action. You know, taking bombardment against Shaltari, they're just going to get close action to death. Scourge even. So you know, it kind of makes sense. But I think that's why, to answer a child's question, is like, you know, that's the bombardment just isn't strong enough. I don't think. A game changer. It's not doesn't have a big enough impact on the game. Even for the factions that have good bombardment, Shaltari and UCM, you still don't see them taking a lot of bombardment because the points aren't there. You know, if you're in a competitive play situation like a tournament, you want to go for points, and taking bombardment, potentially risks your own victory points by blowing stuff up you could capture, but also secondarily it takes points away from other stuff that you need to achieve the objective, whatever that may be. I mean, I think there's some tweaks to be made to bombardment to get it back in the game.
Right, I think that's about all we've got time for episode 4. Thank you for listening, everybody. If you are around at Beachheads 2018 on the 17th of February, if you hear this podcast before then, try and come down to Beachhead. You may see myself and JJ wandering around, or go over and find where the Dropfleet tournament's going on, because we will be there. We may be sort of lying around, frazzled between games. Please.
I'll be the one crying in the corner, rolling nothing but ones all day.
And you'll know who I am, because I'll let you on a little secret. I'm going to bring 3 Bellerophons to the game. Oh, bringing PHR for the first time, very exciting. So I'm going all in on PHR bombers. We'll see if that works.
But no Centurions.
I've ordered some. They are going to arrive in time, but I want to test this 3 bells thing. So that'll be happening.
I don't know what I'm bringing. It could be UCM or Shaltari, depending on how many dots I paint by then.
Right, thank you for listening. Look out for episode 5.